It's Thursday, June 26, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, I was hoping to talk about the looming deadline of the big, beautiful bill or the final days of the Supreme Court term we're in that has been dropping bombshell rulings. But instead, we have to stay with the story of the bombing in Iran last weekend because it just keeps going. So this week has been filled with outrage and anger from the White House over reports that the bombings didn't do as much as Trump had been saying, and he sent Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth out to be his attack dog. So we're going to walk through what's being reported, what Hegseth said both overseas and at a press conference this morning, and more importantly, what isn't being said right now. But before we get to that, please make sure that you are following or subscribe to Make It Make Sense with Grant Herms on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like and subscribe or hit the bell for notifications. If you're watching on YouTube, sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article up yesterday about the Department of Homeland Security having a numbers problem. It's a breakdown by the numbers of some of the most important figures that I was able to put together about what's happening inside the Department of Homeland Security right now. You're definitely going to want to check it out. It is just $5 a month to subscribe, and it really helps keep the show going. If you don't want to do that, please share the show on social media at MIMS Newspod, MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get to the show. Hey, listener, if you listen to the show, you know it's all about breaking down the news in a way that actually makes sense. No spin, just real reporting and smart conversations. Our audience is sharp, curious, and they care about where they spend their time and their money. If you're a brand or a cause that aligns with trust and truth, we want to partner with you. Whether you're launching a new product, pushing a policy, or you just want your message heard by an audience that values insight over outrage, let's make it make sense together. For ad rates, custom campaigns, or sponsorship packages, reach out now to ads@matchbookmediapod.com. That's ads@matchbookmediapod.com, because the smartest conversations deserve the smartest partners. All right, let's get on with the show. On Tuesday afternoon, a report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, basically the military's CIA, said that the barrage of bombs we dropped and missiles we launched against Iran's 3 nuclear sites over the weekend didn't do as much as we thought. The initial report was shared by CNN and the New York Times first, but then it was picked up and confirmed by a ton of other outlets, including MSNBC and Fox News, so across the spectrum here. And what it said was there was some significant structural damage to these 3 sites, like collapsed entrances, but that in reality, the strikes probably only set the Iranian nuclear program back by a few months. And I need to point out here that this leaked intelligence report and the reporting about it all say that this is an early assessment that comes with low confidence and that it could change, as is the case with these things. But, when you're a journalist and you get credible information about a controversial action the government has taken, it's news. Now, the reporting of this sent Trump and, by extension, his administration into a white-hot rage, because Trump had been saying over and over that these 3 sites we targeted were obliterated, and that he was a peacemaker the likes of which nobody had ever seen before. And people like his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, were and are calling this mission the most successful covert mission in U.S. history, though I think the guys on Normandy Beach and SEAL Team 6 might like a word about that. This whole thing has sent the White House on a warpath of a different kind. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said the leaker should be sent to jail and that the FBI is investigating. And Hegseth attacked the press while at a NATO conference in the Netherlands, while Trump was standing just right behind him. And I'm going to play this out in full. It's about 2 minutes long here. I know it's kind of long, but you should hear the whole thing.
Meeting for a tactical reason with President Putin?
Let him answer this question.
Hello, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah. There's a reason the president calls out fake news for what it is. These pilots, these refuelers, these fighters, these air defenders, the skill and the courage it took to go into enemy territory flying 36 hours on behalf of the American people and the world to take out a nuclear program is beyond what anyone in this audience can fathom. And then the instinct of CNN, the instinct of the New York Times is to try to find a way to spin it for their own political reasons to try to hurt President Trump or our country. They don't care what the troops think. They don't care what the world thinks. They want to spin it to try to make him look bad based on a leak. Of course, we've all seen plenty of leakers. And what do leakers do? They have agendas. And what do? Do they share the whole information or just the part that they want to introduce? And when they introduce that preliminary report that's deemed to be a low assessment, you know what a low assessment means? Low confidence in the data in that report. And why is there low confidence? Because all of the evidence of what was just bombed by 12 30,000-pound bombs is buried under a mountain, devastated and obliterated. So if you want to make an assessment of what happened at Fordo, you better get a big shovel and go really deep, because Iran's nuclear program is obliterated. And somebody somewhere is trying to leak something to say, oh, with low confidence, we think maybe it's moderate. Those that dropped the bombs precisely in the right place know exactly what happened when that exploded. And you know who else knows? Iran. That's why they came to the table right away, because their nuclear capabilities have been set back beyond what they thought were possible because of the courage of a commander-in-chief who led our troops, despite what the fake news wants to say.
But you're not disputing the...
So there is a lot to unpack from this, from accusing the press of wanting to damage the troops and our country, which, if you're old enough to remember the lead-up to the Iraq War, it sounded a lot like that. And then the, get the shovel line, which was the real zinger from this press conference you probably have heard by now, to the idea that the pilots who dropped the bombs know exactly what happened, which isn't how that works. They only can confirm if their targets were hit. The damage assessments come from our intelligence community later. And even at that NATO summit, Trump said there wasn't clear info about how well the strike went.
Well, the intelligence was very inconclusive. The intelligence says we don't know. It could have been very severe. That's what the intelligence says.
But then, in the next breath here, Trump does say that these sites were obliterated. So even in the same answer, we're going back and forth. And the thing about all of this is that journalists are just trying to get some real answers here. This strike was a profound departure from previous U.S. policy. It used never-before-used bombs. It was targeting potential nuclear material that could have fallout and environmental impacts. It was done without alerting our allies or Congress. It had the potential to lead to a larger war in the Middle East and remains potentially illegal under U.S. law. It all means that it deserves scrutiny from the press, which is part of the First Amendment and the reason it exists. And also, it doesn't mean that the work being done by the military is being undermined by asking questions about it. But nonetheless, the White House has continued to rage over this. And this morning, Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff trotted back out for another press conference to essentially berate the media.
A ceasefire agreement and the end of the 12-day war. There's been a lot of discussion about what happened and what didn't happen. Step back for a second. Because of decisive military action, President Trump created the conditions to end the war, decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities. I want to read some of the assessments that have been provided, because whether it's fake news, CNN, MSNBC, or the New York Times, there's been fawning coverage of a preliminary assessment. I've had a chance to read it. Every outlet has breathlessly reported on a preliminary assessment from DIA. I'm looking at it right now.
So this time around, Hegseth did bring with him statements from other intelligence agencies and officials that say the damage was severe, and I'll go through those in a second here. But when he says, pick your words, the words in this context matter, because we're trying to understand a degree of damage. And not for nothing, but during the Signal Chat scandal just back in March, it was Hegseth who wanted to parse words over whether he leaked classified war plans or classified attack plans. So, man, either be specific or don't. And speaking of specifics, let's talk about the assessments that have come out since that initial DIA report was leaked. All of these, by the way, have been reported on by the same journalists that covered that early report, myself included. So first, there are foreign reports. Iran's foreign minister said its nuclear facilities were badly damaged. Israeli intelligence, considered among the best in the world, said they see significant damage to Iran's nuclear program, adding Israeli intelligence services haven't arrived at any bottom lines for now, but said, quote, nobody here is disappointed. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the world's top nuclear weapons and energy watchdog, said the airstrike was devastating for Iran's nuclear program, saying the machines that are used to purify uranium, called centrifuges, that were at the main site, Fordo, that was the one that was built into the mountain and was deep underground, that we dropped 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs on, they said it was no longer operational. And the head of the organization said in an interview, quote, there was no escaping significant physical damage, so we can come to a fairly accurate technical conclusion. And then he added that Iran's nuclear program may have been set back decades depending on the type of activity or objective, but also he said that it wasn't fair to say that the program had been wiped out. And here in the U.S., our Director of National Security, Tulsi Gabbard, said in a post online that the 3 facilities we bombed have been destroyed and that it would take Iran years to rebuild. And the CIA director, John Ratcliffe, shared a picture of a letter that he was sending out where he said, quote, a body of credible intelligence indicates Iran's nuclear program has been severely damaged by recent targeted strikes. This includes new intelligence from a historically reliable and accurate source/method that several key Iranian nuclear facilities were destroyed and would have to be rebuilt over the course of years. Now, it is worth saying here that Gabbard, up until last week when Trump got upset with her for not following his talking points, she had been testifying that bombing Iran wouldn't be worth the risk because Iran wasn't all that close to having a nuclear weapon, something that the IAEA and other intelligence community officials continue to say. John Ratcliffe has been pushing for years for the U.S. to have the authority, or the president to have the authority, to bomb Iran, going back to when he was a member of Congress. And in this recent round of fighting between Israel and Iran, reportedly he was the only intelligence official encouraging Trump to carry out this strike. Now, that doesn't mean that what Gabbard and Ratcliffe are saying here is wrong. It just means that it comes with a grain of salt. But let's get back to the press conference today with Hegseth, because he said all those things. He read them word for word, angrily at members of the Pentagon press corps, who are people, many of them, who have been covering defense departments for decades. And again, we're just trying to get answers from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But this press conference today wasn't really about that. In fact, it wasn't really about anybody in the room. It was for one person, and that was the president. It was tailor-made for wall-to-wall cable coverage, which Trump was absolutely watching, given what he was posting before and then after the press conference on social media. It was filled with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs talking about the stories of the service members who worked to carry out the mission, some of them working on these things long before Trump ever took office. It also had little quotes from them about this explosion being the brightest thing they'd ever seen, or feeling the Patriot missiles go off. There were these big charts and pictures, and at one point they played a video of one of these massive bombs being tested, which is perfect for a side-by-side with a talking head on cable news that will no doubt get used everywhere. And this presentation really tracks with how officials in both of Trump's administrations have found that they can get through to him by paring down briefings to single pages, using lots of charts and pictures, which is what they reportedly had to do during the first administration. And then most recently, Tulsi Gabbard had been shopping around for producers to help her make the president's daily intelligence briefings feel more like a Fox News broadcast so he'd pay attention. And I'm also not saying that the stories of the service members and the work they put into this thing aren't important. They are interesting stories. It just comes from an angle here where those stories could be told if the White House would also answer these questions without berating the press. But That's what he chose to do more or less every step of the way, because after the presentation was over, he took questions, and there were quite a few of them, but really only one of them mattered, and it was this one.
Rich uranium. Do you have certainty that all the highly enriched uranium was inside the Fordo mountain, or some of it, because there were satellite photos that showed more than a dozen trucks there 2 days in advance? Are you certain none of that highly enriched uranium was moved?
Of course, we're watching every single aspect, but Jennifer, you've been about the worst, the one who misrepresents the most intentionally. What the president says. I'm familiar.
Report about the ventilation shafts on Saturday night, and in fact, I was the first to describe the B-2 bombers, the refueling, the entire mission with great accuracy. So I take issue with that.
I appreciate you acknowledging that this was the first the most successful mission based on operational security that this department has done since you've been here, and I appreciate that. So we're looking at all aspects of intelligence and making sure we have a sense of what was where.
So Jennifer there is the Fox News Pentagon correspondent Jennifer Griffin, who has been doing that job for 30 years and was Hegseth's former colleague at Fox News. By all accounts, she is a consummate professional and one of the last real news people left at Fox News. And what she's asking about is a critical question: whether or not 800 to 900 pounds of enriched uranium that could be used to build at least one nuclear weapon and the equipment to continue enriching more were moved. Because foreign intelligence officials say that prior to our bombing run last weekend, all that was moved from a lot of these sites, largely because Trump had been telegraphing a coming attack with posting about it repeatedly on social media. Now, Hegseth was asked a similar question about the uranium a few more times until he said this. Take a listen.
So I'm not aware of any intelligence that I've reviewed that says things were not where they were supposed to be, moved or otherwise.
So I do not know what this means. It seems like, at first, he's saying that the uranium wasn't moved, or at least he doesn't have any confirmation of that, but then continues to sidestep by saying that things were where they were supposed to be, moved or otherwise, which, as a sentence, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And Hegseth also didn't answer why there were dozens of vehicles seen going in and out of the Fordo site in the days before the attack. He was asked about that too. And then Trump jumped in on social media, on Truth Social, saying, quote, "The cars and small trucks at the site were those of concrete workers trying to help cover up the shafts." He means the shafts that go into the underground bunker. Saying, "Nothing was taken out of the facility, would take too long, too dangerous, and very heavy and hard to move," with an exclamation point. But that's not necessarily true. The head of the Arms Control Association told Jennifer Griffin, of all people, that Iran had already made it clear to international watchdogs that it was moving several hundred pounds of uranium to a third site, a different site that it's unclear if we know or don't know where it is. And that could be done by turning it into gas and storing it in tanks the size of scuba tanks and then taken out in cars and trucks. Now, would I want to be the dude driving an F-150 with a bunch of uranium scuba tanks in the back of my truck going over rocky roads? I don't think so, but it's possible that they could have moved it. And the European Union is saying that Iran's uranium supply and stores are still largely intact, specifically saying that in their initial reports, so like all these could be subject to change, are saying that the site at Fordo has extensive damage but was not structurally destroyed, which does differ from what the White House has been saying. So in the end here, the intelligence about this entire thing is inconclusive at best, and it seems like the White House and Trump, in pursuit of a victory lap, jumped the gun on celebrating. But by doing that, it's allowed Trump to attack journalists and news outlets. He's now calling for reporters at CNN and the New York Times to be fired. He called them evil people. This is the sitting president of the United States. And these intimidation tactics have been successful for him so far. ABC settled with Trump, paying him $15 million. It looks like CBS is on the edge of a $20 million settlement payment to him, and his complaints about his recent interview on ABC helped to get longtime journalist there Terry Moran fired from ABC, although ABC says it's because Moran called Trump and Stephen Miller world-class haters on social media, which seems pretty flimsy. So in this instance, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Fox News take some steps to circle the wagons a little bit and maybe even let go of Jennifer Griffin. But the takeaway from this entire thing ends up being here that in ending a real war between Israel and Iran, Trump turned around and started a fake one with the press. All right, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month and helps support the show and lets me keep doing episodes just like this one. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on X and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.